The book of Isaiah does not begin gently. It opens like a courtroom summons, not a comforting invitation. Heaven and earth are called as witnesses, not to celebrate, but to accuse. From its very first lines, Isaiah establishes a tone that unsettles rather than reassures. This is not a book designed to soothe the anxious soul. It is a book that exposes, confronts, and strips away illusions with relentless precision. To understand why the book of Isaiah is often considered the most terrifying in the Bible, one must begin not with prophecy, but with history. Isaiah lived in a time of apparent stability. The nation of Judah was not in ruins when his ministry began. Jerusalem still stood. The temple still functioned. Sacrifices were offered daily. Worship appeared intact. From the outside, Judah looked spiritually alive. Yet Isaiah's words reveal a different reality beneath the surface. Isaiah prophesied during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, 4 kings whose combined rule spanned more than half a century. This period marked one of the most complex eras in Judah's history. Politically, Judah was surrounded by rising superpowers. Spiritually, the people were drifting without realizing it. Morally, corruption had become normalized. Isaiah stood at the intersection of all three. The prophet was not an outsider shouting from the wilderness. He moved among the elite. His language, structure, and imagery suggests education, proximity to power, and access to the royal court. Isaiah was not ignored because he was unknown. He was resisted because he was understood. The terror of Isaiah does not come from chaos. It comes from clarity. In the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah records a vision that sets the trajectory for the entire book. He sees the Lord seated on a throne, high and lifted up, and the hem of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim surround the throne, crying out words that shake the foundations of the structure itself. Holy, holy, holy. The repetition is not poetic. It is overwhelming. The holiness of God is not presented as comforting. It is presented as dangerous. Isaiah's response is immediate and visceral. He does not feel inspired. He feels undone. This moment establishes a central theme that will echo through all 66 chapters. The presence of God is not safe for the unclean, even when they are religious. Isaiah is not terrified because God is absent. He is terrified because God is present. From this vision flows Isaiah's commission. He is sent not to soften judgment, but to clarify it. He is told that his words will harden hearts, dull ears, and blind eyes. This is not a call to success by human standards. It is a call to faithfulness in the face of rejection. Isaiah's ministry will not lead to widespread repentance. It will expose resistance. This alone sets Isaiah apart. Most prophetic books contain cycles of warning and response. Isaiah contains prolonged confrontation with little immediate change. Judgment is not postponed because of tears. It is delayed only by God's patience. As Isaiah speaks, the historical backdrop grows darker. Assyria rises in the north, devouring nations with terrifying efficiency. Cities fall, refugees flood Judah's borders. Fear becomes a constant presence. Kings scramble for alliances. Political survival becomes more important than covenant faithfulness. Isaiah watches all of this and speaks into it without compromise. He warns Judah not to trust foreign powers. He declares that alliances born of fear will fail. He insists that security cannot be manufactured through strategy alone. This message is not well received. Kings prefer reassurance, not rebuke. Isaiah does not adjust his tone. The terror of the book deepens as Isaiah exposes the contradiction at the heart of Judah's worship. The people continue their sacrifices. Festivals are observed, prayers are offered. Yet Isaiah declares that God despises these rituals, not because worship is wrong, but because it has become disconnected from justice. The accusation is devastating. God is not rejecting paganism here. He is rejecting corrupted religion. The people's hands are full of blood, even as they lift them in prayer. Their songs are loud, but their compassion is silent. Isaiah presents a God who sees through ceremony and confronts hypocrisy without hesitation. This is where the book becomes deeply unsettling. Isaiah does not allow distance between sin and consequence. He does not frame judgment as distant or abstract. He places it within the present moment. Cities will fall. The land will be desolate. Children will suffer the consequences of generational rebellion. The language is graphic, deliberate, and unflinching. Yet Isaiah is not motivated by cruelty. He is compelled by truth. As the timeline advances, Isaiah witnesses the reign of Ahaz, a king defined by fear. Faced with military threats, Ahaz chooses political manipulation over trust in God. Isaiah confronts him directly, offering a sign from the Lord. Ahaz refuses not out of humility, but out of resistance. His refusal is framed as piety, but Isaiah exposes it as disbelief. This moment introduces another terrifying element of the book. God does not always force belief. Sometimes he allows refusal to stand. The famous prophecy of Emmanuel emerges from this confrontation. A child will be born. God will be with his people. Yet even this promise is wrapped in warning. The sign is given not to comfort Ahaz, but to outlast him. Salvation will come, but not on the terms of the fearful. As Isaiah continues, the scope of his visions expands. He speaks not only of Judah, but of the nations. Babylon, Assyria, Moab, Egypt, none are beyond God's judgment. The terror of Isaiah is global. No empire is too powerful. No culture is exempt. History itself is placed under divine scrutiny. This is not a God confined to Israel. This is a God who governs time. Isaiah's language becomes increasingly intense. Pride is dismantled. Arrogance is exposed. Human achievement is reduced to dust. The book insists that what humanity fears most, loss of power, collapse of identity, exposure of sin, is inevitable apart from alignment with God. And yet, even here, hope flickers quietly, not as escape, but as refinement. Isaiah introduces the concept of a remnant. Not all will fall, not all will be destroyed. A small group will survive in it because they are stronger, but because they are preserved. This idea does not lessen the terror, it sharpens it. Salvation will not be collective. It will be discerning. By the end of the early chapters, one truth is unmistakable. The book of Isaiah is terrifying not because it predicts disaster, but because it reveals reality. It strips away false security. It exposes the gap between appearance and truth. It presents a God who cannot be manipulated by ritual, alliance, or denial. Isaiah does not allow the reader to remain neutral. He demands attention. He demands reckoning. And this is only the beginning. As Isaiah's voice continued to echo through Jerusalem, the world beyond Judah's borders was changing with terrifying speed. Assyria was no longer a distant threat whispered about by traders and travelers. It had become an unstoppable force reshaping the political landscape of the ancient Near East. Nations fell one by one, not merely defeated but erased. Their kings were humiliated, their populations scattered, their gods mocked. Judah watched all of this from a fragile position. To the north, the kingdom of Israel trembled. To the east and south, smaller states collapsed. The pressure on Jerusalem intensified as fear moved faster than armies. Rumors of Assyrian brutality circulated, cities burned, leaders flayed, captives led away with hooks. This was not abstract danger. It was approaching reality. Isaiah stood in the midst of this growing panic and refused to offer the reassurance the people wanted. Instead, he exposed the deeper crisis beneath the political one. Judah's greatest threat was not Assyria, it was misplaced trust. The nation's leaders believed survival could be negotiated, engineered, or purchased. Faith became secondary to strategy. This is where the book of Isaiah begins to feel deeply unsettling. Isaiah presents a God who refuses to compete with fear-based solutions. The prophet insists that turning to Assyria's rivals Egypt alliances, tribute would not bring safety. These choices were not neutral. They were acts of betrayal against the covenant. The terror lies in this revelation. Judah was not being destroyed because God was absent. It was being shaken because God was present and unwilling to be replaced. The fall of the northern kingdom of Israel confirmed Isaiah's warnings. Samaria collapsed under Assyrian assault. The 10 tribes were carried away. The land was repopulated with foreigners. Identity dissolved. What had once seemed unthinkable became irreversible. Judah did not respond with repentance. It responded with fear. Isaiah describes leaders who stagger, not from wine, but from confusion. Priests and prophets alike lose clarity. Vision becomes blurred. Judgment falters. The spiritual leadership that should have anchored the nation collapses under pressure. Isaiah's words grow sharper. He speaks of a people who draw near to God with their lips while their hearts remain distant. This is not ignorance, it is selective obedience. They hear God's words, but refuse their implications. This is where Isaiah becomes terrifying in a different way. He does not portray rebellion as loud defiance, he portrays it as polite distance. Worship continues, language remains religious, yet trust has shifted elsewhere. God is acknowledged but not relied upon. As Assyria advances, Judah's kings face impossible decisions. Ahaz, already marked by fear, deepens the nation's compromise. He adopts foreign practices, alters worship, and reshapes the temple itself to resemble Assyrian designs. This is not merely political submission, it is spiritual assimilation. Isaiah witnesses this transformation and names it for what it is. The terror of Isaiah is not only in what will happen, but in what has already happened. Judah is becoming unrecognizable to itself. Yet within this darkness, Isaiah's language begins to stretch beyond immediate events. He speaks of a future king, one unlike Ahaz, a ruler marked by righteousness, justice, and understanding. A child upon whose shoulders authority will rest. The prophecy is luminous, but it does not cancel judgment, it stands within it. This contrast intensifies the unease. Hope does not erase consequence, it coexists with it. As Assyria continues its campaign, Isaiah describes the arrogance of empires with surgical precision. He portrays Assyria as an axe in God's hand, powerful, effective, and utterly unaware that it is being used. This metaphor is unsettling. God is not merely opposing Assyria, he is directing it. The implication is chilling. Judgment is not always chaos. Sometimes it is order directed toward exposure. Assyria believes it conquers by its own strength. Isaiah reveals a different reality. The empire's success is temporary and conditional. Once its purpose is fulfilled, it too will face judgment. No power escapes accountability. This vision reframes fear entirely. Judah fears Assyria. Isaiah reveals that Assyria should fear God. Yet this revelation does not bring immediate comfort. It demands a recalibration of trust that Judah resists. The people prefer visible armies to invisible sovereignty. They prefer immediate solutions to long obedience. Isaiah does not adjust his message to accommodate this resistance. He speaks of devastation with unfiltered clarity. Cities emptied, land scorched, survivors few, the language is intentionally stark. Isaiah refuses to sanitize the cost of rebellion. The terror deepens because Isaiah does not place judgment in the distant future. He speaks as though it is already unfolding. This creates a sense of inevitability. Judah stands at a crossroads repeatedly, and repeatedly chooses the path of fear. Isaiah's prophecies accumulate like storm clouds, heavy and unavoidable. Yet, even here, Isaiah introduces a disturbing mercy. God delays total destruction, not because Judah deserves it, but because of his own character. This delay is not approval, it is restraint. It allows time for repentance even as judgment advances. This tension becomes one of the most haunting aspects of the book. Judah lives in the space between warning and collapse. Every day is an opportunity to turn. Every day is also a step closer to consequence. Isaiah's presence in this moment is itself unsettling. He is not removed from suffering. He lives through the same fear, hears the same rumors, watches the same armies move, yet he stands anchored in a vision of God that reorders reality. This makes him both a witness and a warning. He demonstrates that faith does not remove fear, but it redefines what fear is appropriate. By the end of this phase of Isaiah's ministry, the book has established its terrifying framework. God is wholly beyond human comfort. Judgment is active, not hypothetical. Hope exists, but not without cost. Trust misplaced will be exposed, and history itself is an instrument in God's hand. Isaiah does not allow the reader to romanticize faith. He places it under pressure. The terror of Isaiah is not meant to paralyze, it is meant to awaken. And the awakening has only begun. The reign of Hezekiah opens like a fragile breath of hope in a suffocating age. Unlike his father Ahaz, Hezekiah does not begin from fear, but from reform. He tears down high places, destroys foreign altars, and attempts to realign Judah with the covenant that has long been neglected. For the first time in generations, Jerusalem senses movement toward faithfulness. Yet this renewal does not shield the nation from danger. In fact, it seems to draw danger closer. Assyria does not retreat because Judah reforms, it advances. The empire's shadow stretches across the land as cities fall with brutal efficiency. Lachish, one of Judah's strongest fortified cities, collapses. Refugees flood toward Jerusalem carrying stories of siege ramps, impaled bodies, and Assyrian banners planted atop conquered walls. Fear enters the city like a living thing. This is where Isaiah's narrative becomes intensely psychological. Jerusalem is no longer debating theology and abstraction. Survival is at stake. The Assyrian army encamps within sight of the city walls. Their presence is deliberate. They do not rush, they wait. They allow terror to mature. The Rabshakeh, Assyria's chief spokesman, steps forward and speaks not in some foreign tongue, but in the language of Judah. His words are calculated to penetrate the hearts of the people listening from the walls. He mocks Egypt as a broken reed. He ridicules Hezekiah's reforms. He dares the people to trust a God who, he claims, has already been defeated elsewhere. This moment is one of the most terrifying scenes in the book of Isaiah, not because of violence but because of persuasion. The Rabshakeh reframes faith as foolishness. He presents surrender as wisdom. He weaponizes logic, experience, and fear. He does not deny God's existence. He questions God's relevance. Jerusalem listens in silence. Hezekiah's officials tear their clothes. Panic spreads quietly through the city. This is not the fear of the unknown. It is the fear that faith might finally fail. Hezekiah turns to Isaiah. This act alone marks a turning point. Instead of sending tribute or forging alliances, the king seeks a word from the prophet. Isaiah responds with calm authority. He declares that the Assyrian threats are empty noise. The king of Assyria will not enter the city. He will not shoot an arrow there. The certainty of Isaiah's words is unsettling. There is no negotiation, no contingency, only declaration. Assyria responds with escalation. Letters arrive, mocking Hezekiah's trust. The gods of other nations could not save them. The letter claims what makes Judah different. This is the core terror Isaiah exposes. The question is not whether God exists, but whether he is distinct. Hezekiah takes the letter to the temple and spreads it before the Lord. This act is deeply symbolic. The threat is no longer managed politically, it is placed directly in God's presence. Hezekiah prays not for survival alone, but for God's name to be vindicated. Isaiah's response is one of the most dramatic prophecies in the entire book. He announces that God has heard the mockery, that Assyria's arrogance has reached divine attention, that the empire which believed itself invincible is, in truth, restrained by limits it does not see. The prophecy describes Assyria's king as unknowingly acting under divine surveillance, his movements anticipated, his rage accounted for, his end determined. This portrayal is terrifying because it strips human power of its illusion of autonomy. That very night, the narrative reaches its climax. Without siege engines breaching the walls, without swords clashing, the Assyrian army collapses. Thousands die. No human explanation is offered. The threat evaporates as suddenly as it appeared. Jerusalem wakes to silence. Assyria withdraws. For a brief moment, faith appears vindicated. Isaiah's God has acted decisively. Fear loosens its grip. Relief floods the city. Yet Isaiah does not allow this moment to become a conclusion. The terror of the book of Isaiah deepens because victory does not equal security. Soon after, Hezekiah falls ill. The king who trusted God at the city's edge now faces mortality within his own body. Isaiah tells him to prepare for death. There is no reassurance, no miracle promised. Hezekiah prays again. This time, God grants healing and extends his life. The moment is intimate, powerful, and deeply human. Yet it becomes another turning point, not all of it righteous. When envoys from Babylon arrive, impressed by Judah's survival, Hezekiah shows them everything: treasuries, armories, wealth accumulated under God's protection. Isaiah confronts him. The king's openness is not hospitality, it is pride. Isaiah announces a future judgment that feels distant, almost abstract. Babylon will one day return, not as envoys but as conquerors. Everything shown will be carried away. Even Hezekiah's descendants will be taken. The terror here is subtle. Judgment is delayed but not cancelled. The book of Isaiah now reveals a pattern that is deeply unsettling. Faith saves Jerusalem from immediate destruction, but it does not erase long-term consequence. Moments of trust coexist with moments of failure. Obedience is real, but incomplete. This complexity makes Isaiah terrifying because it refuses simple narratives. God is not manipulated by ritual or reform. He responds to genuine trust, but he remains sovereign over history. The Assyrian crisis ends, but the deeper problem remains unresolved. Judah survives, but it does not transform completely. Isaiah stands at the center of this tension, bearing witness to both deliverance and doom. His prophecies stretch forward beyond his lifetime. The book begins to shift its gaze from Assyria to Babylon, from immediate threats to future exile. Fear does not diminish, it changes shape. The terror of Isaiah is no longer only about invasion. It becomes about inevitability. Jerusalem has seen what faith can do, and yet it will forget. The question now is not whether God can save, it is whether the people will remain faithful when fear recedes. Isaiah's answer, implied rather than spoken, is devastating. History will repeat itself, and the most terrifying revelations of the book still lie ahead. After the night when Assyria vanished like a dream at dawn, Jerusalem returned to life with a fragile sense of relief. The city's walls still stood. The temple still gleamed beneath the sun. Songs of thanksgiving rose once more. To the people it felt as though history itself had bent in their favor. Yet Isaiah's gaze did not linger on celebration. His vision moved forward, beyond the present calm, into a future that no one else could yet imagine. This is where the book of Isaiah becomes deeply unsettling. The prophet begins to speak of Babylon not as an empire towering in power, but as a shadow still forming on the horizon. At the time, Babylon is politically insignificant compared to Assyria. It does not inspire fear. It does not dominate the imagination. And yet Isaiah names it as Judah's future captor with unnerving certainty. This is not prediction in the human sense. It is revelation. Isaiah speaks as though history has already unfolded. He describes a people who will be torn from their land, marched eastward, stripped of identity and memory. Jerusalem will fall. The temple will burn. The symbols of God's presence will be dismantled stone by stone. What makes this terrifying is not only the destruction itself, but the tone in which it is delivered. There is no urgency in Isaiah's voice. No desperation. No attempt to shock the people into immediate repentance. The judgment is spoken as inevitable, as though the decision has already been sealed. The terror deepens as Isaiah introduces a concept far more disturbing than invasion: divine silence. Isaiah foresees a time when God will no longer intervene dramatically. No angelic armies. No miraculous deliverance at the city gates. No prophet standing before kings with immediate words of rescue. Instead, there will be absence. The heavens will feel closed. Prayers will echo unanswered. For a people whose identity is built on covenant and presence, this silence is devastating. The book of Isaiah portrays exile not merely as displacement, but as disorientation. In Babylon, Judah will no longer control time through feasts, space through temple worship, or memory through land. Everything familiar will be dismantled, and Isaiah speaks this before it happens. The terror lies in the waiting. Generations will live under the weight of words they did not hear spoken, but which shaped their reality. Isaiah's prophecies become a kind of haunting, passed down orally, then written, then remembered in exile as explanation and indictment. The prophet describes the exile as a refining fire, but not one that burns quickly. This is prolonged suffering, years stretching into decades, children born who have never seen Zion, elders who die remembering a city that no longer exists. Isaiah does not soften the image. He speaks of captives sitting in darkness, of chains, of humiliation, of songs remembered but no longer sung. The God who once thundered from Sinai now appears distant. This is the most terrifying shift in the book of Isaiah. God does not cease to exist, he ceases to be felt. And yet Isaiah insists that even this silence is not abandonment, it is judgment with purpose. The exile exposes something Judah could never confront at home: how deeply they had confused God's presence with their own comfort. In Babylon, there will be no illusion of control. Isaiah describes the fall of Jerusalem as a necessary breaking. The city had become a symbol people trusted more than the God who dwelt there. Its destruction forces a reckoning. Faith can no longer be inherited automatically. It must be redefined without temple, priesthood, or king. This stripping away is portrayed with brutal honesty. Isaiah speaks of shame covering the nation like a garment, of nations mocking Judah's God, of questions whispered in exile. Where is your Lord now? The prophet does not answer these questions quickly. He allows the weight of them to remain. This narrative restraint is deliberate. Isaiah understands that premature consolation would cheapen the reality of judgment. The terror of exile must be fully felt before restoration can be understood. Yet even here, Isaiah introduces something quietly subversive. He begins to speak in the future tense of comfort. Not yet, but coming. He speaks of a voice crying in the wilderness, of valleys lifted and mountains made low, of a returned path carved through desolation. These images appear almost dreamlike against the harsh reality of exile. What makes them unsettling is their timing. Comfort is announced while judgment is still certain. Hope is introduced while suffering is unavoidable. Isaiah's God does not wait for repentance to speak of restoration. He speaks of it while exile looms, embedding promise within terror. This duality is central to the book's power. Isaiah portrays God as both the architect of judgment and the author of redemption. These are not competing roles. They are inseparable aspects of divine holiness. The exile will not erase Israel. It will redefine it. Isaiah envisions a people purified through loss, a remnant shaped by suffering, faith stripped of entitlement, worship reborn in humility. But this vision does not erase the pain. Isaiah lingers on images of brokenness, of cities reduced to ruins, of a land left desolate, waiting for its people to return. The land itself becomes a silent witness to covenant violation. Time stretches. Isaiah's prophecies now span generations. He speaks to those not yet born, describing realities they will inherit without choice. The book becomes larger than its prophet, larger than its original audience. This is part of what makes Isaiah terrifying. It refuses to remain contained in its own era. The God of Isaiah is not bound to immediate resolution. He works on timelines that dwarf human lifespans. He allows centuries to pass between warning and fulfillment, between promise and restoration. For Judah, this means living in uncertainty. For the reader, it means confronting a God who does not conform to urgency. As Isaiah's vision moves deeper into exile, a new tone begins to emerge. It is still solemn, but it carries an undercurrent of resolve. God has not forgotten his people. He is not miscalculated. The exile is not a failure of divine power, but an expression of it. This reframing is deeply unsettling. Suffering is not explained away. It is claimed. Isaiah presents a God who uses even devastation to accomplish redemption. This does not make the devastation less real. It makes it more meaningful. The terror of Isaiah is now layered. It is the terror of judgment, the terror of silence, the terror of waiting, and the terror of realizing that God's purposes cannot be rushed, resisted, or redefined. By the end of this phase of the book, the reader stands alongside a people on the brink of exile, armed only with words spoken long before their chains are forged. The silence has not yet fallen, but it is coming. And when it does, Isaiah's voice will be one of the few lights remaining in the darkness. Out of the long silence Isaiah foresaw, a voice begins to rise, not from a throne, not from an army, but from suffering itself. This is where the book of Isaiah reaches its most unsettling and paradoxical revelation. After judgment, after exile, after the dismantling of everything familiar, Isaiah introduces a figure unlike any the people expected. He is not described as powerful. He is not crowned. He does not arrive with spectacle. He comes quietly, almost unnoticed, and yet everything in the book bends toward him. Isaiah calls him the servant. This servant does not restore Israel through conquest. He does not reclaim Jerusalem by force. Instead, he absorbs the weight of the nation's failure. Isaiah describes him as despised and rejected, acquainted with grief, carrying sorrows that are not his own. The language is intimate and disturbing. This is not abstract symbolism. It is visceral, flesh-wounded, spirit-crushed, justice inverted. The terror of this vision lies in its reversal of expectations. Isaiah presents a God who chooses to save not by overpowering evil, but by entering into it. The servant is not punished because of his own rebellion. He suffers because of the rebellion of others. He bears guilt, shame, and consequence that do not belong to him. This is deeply unsettling within the framework Isaiah has built. Up to this point, judgment has been precise. Sin produces consequence. Rebellion leads to exile. Justice is measured and deserved, and then Isaiah introduces substitution. Innocence suffering for the guilty. Healing emerging from wounds, life from death. The book does not explain this away. It simply declares it. Isaiah describes a servant as one whose appearance is marred beyond recognition, yet whose suffering accomplishes what centuries of warnings could not. He brings reconciliation. He restores covenant not through fear, but through sacrifice. This revelation reframes everything that came before it. The terror of Isaiah is no longer only about judgment. It is about love that refuses to remain distant, a holiness willing to be broken rather than abandon its people. And yet, this does not diminish the cost. Isaiah does not sanitize the suffering of the servant. He emphasizes it. The servant is led like a lamb to slaughter. He does not defend himself. He does not resist. He accepts injustice fully. The implication is staggering. God's response to human rebellion is not annihilation but incarnation into suffering. This is perhaps the most terrifying idea of all. Not that God judges sin, but that he bears it. The servant's suffering is presented as purposeful, not accidental. Isaiah insists that through this pain, many will be justified. This language would have been shocking to Isaiah's audience. It suggests that righteousness can be transferred, that guilt can be lifted, that restoration can come through another's obedience. The book now reaches its emotional and theological climax. After generations of rebellion, fear, exile, and silence, Isaiah reveals that God's ultimate act is not distance but nearness, not wrath alone but redemption through vulnerability. Yet even here Isaiah does not allow triumphalism. The servant is exalted only after humiliation. Glory follows obedience, not power. The path to restoration runs through suffering, not around it. This final movement of Isaiah transforms the terror of the book into something deeper and more enduring. Fear becomes awe, judgment becomes purification, exile becomes preparation, suffering becomes the birthplace of hope. Isaiah closes with visions of renewal that feel almost impossible in light of everything that has come before. A new heaven and a new earth, former things no longer remembered, joy replacing mourning, peace reshaping creation itself. But these visions are not escapist, they are earned, they come after devastation, not before it. This is why the book of Isaiah remains so unsettling. It refuses to offer hope without honesty. It refuses to offer comfort without confrontation. It presents a God who is terrifying not because he is cruel, but because he is uncompromising in holiness and relentless in love. Isaiah's God will dismantle nations, expose idols, silence arrogance, and allow suffering to unfold. But he will also enter that suffering himself, bearing wounds so that restoration can occur without denying justice. This duality is what makes Isaiah endure. The book forces the reader to confront uncomfortable truths, that faith cannot coexist with complacency, that worship without trust is empty, that salvation is costly, and that God's purposes extend far beyond immediate relief. Isaiah ends not with a whisper, but with an invitation and a warning intertwined. The invitation is to return, to seek the Lord while he may be found, to abandon false securities. The warning is that ignoring this call leads only to deeper loss. The terror of Isaiah is therefore not meant to destroy the reader. It is meant to awaken them, to strip away illusions, to reveal a God who cannot be managed, negotiated with, or reduced to comfort. A God who judges in order to heal, God who wounds in order to restore, who allows exile so that return can be meaningful. As the final images fade, Isaiah leaves us standing between fear and hope, judgment and mercy, silence and promise. The book does not tell us which path we will choose. It simply reveals the consequences of each. And that is why, centuries later, the book of Isaiah still terrifies. Not because it is dark, but because it is true. Long after the prophet Isaiah is gone, long after Jerusalem has fallen and risen again, his words refuse to fade into history. They remain alive, unsettling, uncomfortably relevant. The book of Isaiah does not belong to a single era. It moves through time like a blade, cutting through assumptions wherever it is read. This is why it continues to disturb not only ancient kings and exiled nations, but modern readers who would rather keep God predictable. Isaiah's terror does not end with prophecy fulfilled. It intensifies with understanding. As centuries pass, Isaiah's words are read in synagogues, whispered in exile, debated among scholars, and later proclaimed by early followers of Christ. Each generation encounters the book differently, yet none escape its weight. The judgments still accuse, the promises still provoke hope. The servant still stands at the center, wounded and exalted. What makes Isaiah terrifying in every age is its refusal to let faith become passive. The book insists that God is not merely a comfort to be sought in crisis, but a sovereign presence that disrupts false peace. Isaiah does not allow belief to settle into routine. He confronts worship that has lost obedience, religion that has lost reverence, and trust that has been replaced by control. In this sense, Isaiah becomes timelessly dangerous. Modern readers often approach scripture seeking reassurance, inspiration, or affirmation. Isaiah offers something else entirely. He exposes the cost of calling God holy. He demands that if God is truly sovereign, then no area of life remains untouched. This is where Isaiah collides with contemporary faith. The idols Isaiah condemns are not confined to ancient temples. They evolve. Power, security, identity, nationalism, self-sufficiency, these are modern equivalents of carved images. Isaiah's language, though ancient, cuts directly into present realities. His God still refuses to share glory. The terror returns. Isaiah's vision of judgment is not obsessed with punishment, it is obsessed with truth. Falsehood cannot coexist with holiness. Illusion cannot survive divine light. This is why Isaiah speaks so relentlessly about exposure. Cities exposed, hearts exposed, nations exposed. This exposure is what makes the book uncomfortable rather than merely dramatic. Isaiah does not allow distance. The reader is never permitted to observe judgment safely from the outside. The book subtly turns the gaze inward. Where do you place your trust? What do you fear losing? What would exile look like for you? Isaiah never answers these questions directly. He lets them linger. The terrifying brilliance of Isaiah is that it refuses to conclude neatly, even after restoration is promised, even after the servant's suffering is revealed. The book ends with unresolved tension. There is joy, but also warning, renewal, but also remembrance of what was lost. This ambiguity is intentional. Isaiah understands that faith lived in certainty alone becomes shallow. True faith is formed in tension between fear and trust, judgment and mercy, silence and promise. The God of Isaiah does not eliminate tension, he inhabits it. This is perhaps the most disturbing realization of all. God does not remove himself from the consequences of human failure. He enters them, he speaks through them, he redeems from within them. This makes Isaiah not only a book of prophecy, but a book of confrontation. Isaiah confronts the desire to domesticate God. He refuses to let divine holiness be softened into sentimentality. He portrays a God who loves fiercely, judges justly, and redeems at unimaginable cost. This God cannot be reduced to slogans or managed through ritual. Isaiah's God still shakes foundations. In every generation, readers attempt to tame the book, to isolate its comforting passages, to avoid its harder truths. But Isaiah resists fragmentation. Judgment and hope are inseparable. Terror and grace are intertwined. This is why the book remains so powerful. It does not allow selective faith, it demands wholeness. Isaiah's enduring impact lies in its insistence that history itself is theological. Events are not random. Empires rise and fall within divine awareness. Human choices carry weight beyond immediate consequence. Silence can be as purposeful as speech. In a world obsessed with immediacy, Isaiah speaks of patience. In a culture addicted to control, Isaiah speaks of surrender. In an age uncomfortable with suffering, Isaiah speaks of redemption through wounds. These themes remain unsettling because they challenge modern assumptions just as violently as they challenged ancient ones. Isaiah does not offer escape from reality. He offers transformation through it. As the book continues to be read, its terror becomes personal. Not because it predicts destruction, but because it demands honesty. It asks whether we truly want a holy God or merely a helpful one. This question has never lost its power. Isaiah stands as a witness across time, reminding every reader that faith is not about avoiding fear, but about placing it correctly. The fear of empires fades. The fear of loss changes. The fear of death shifts. But the fear of the Lord remains the beginning of wisdom. That fear is not panic, that it is recognition. Recognition that God is not ours to shape. Recognition that salvation is costly. Recognition that hope is born only after truth is faced. This is why the book of Isaiah remains the most terrifying book in the Bible. Not because it speaks of destruction, but because it reveals a God who will not let us remain unchanged. And for those who encounter that God honestly, terror is not the end, it is the beginning. At this stage of Isaiah, the terror no longer comes primarily from visions of armies, exile, or suffering servants. It comes from something quieter and far more invasive. It comes from the way the book dismantles the illusion that human beings are in control of their own story. Isaiah does not merely describe God acting in history. He reveals a God who defines history itself, while humanity struggles to understand its place within it. This is where Isaiah presses deepest into the human psyche. The book exposes a fear older than empires and stronger than death, the fear of losing meaning. Judah feared Assyria. Later generations feared Babylon. Modern readers fear uncertainty, irrelevance, and the collapse of identity. Isaiah speaks into all of these fears by removing the false foundations upon which they rest. Isaiah's God is not threatened by chaos. He names it, he permits it, and he uses it. This is profoundly unsettling. The prophet repeatedly shows that when human systems collapse, political, religious, cultural, it is not always because God has failed. Often it is because those systems were never meant to bear ultimate weight. Isaiah strips away every substitute for trust until nothing remains but God himself. This stripping away feels like terror because it leaves no refuge. Isaiah does not allow escape into nostalgia. He does not allow safety in tradition. He does not allow confidence in morality alone. Even righteousness, when detached from humility, is exposed as fragile. The book forces the reader into a kind of spiritual exile. Comforting explanations are removed. Predictable formulas fail. The familiar language of reward and punishment becomes insufficient. Instead, Isaiah confronts the reader with a God who cannot be reduced to transaction. This is where fear turns inward. If God is truly sovereign, then control is an illusion. If God's holiness is absolute, then no human system is immune to judgment. If God's redemption operates through suffering, then avoidance is not faith. Isaiah does not argue these points philosophically. He embodies them narratively. Every section of the book demonstrates that human attempts to secure life apart from God ultimately collapse. Kings fail. Alliances fail. Worship fails when disconnected from obedience. Even reform fails when rooted in pride. This cumulative effect is exhausting by design. Isaiah wears down resistance. The reader begins to feel what Judah felt, the slow realization that there is nowhere left to run. No political solution, no religious shortcut, no moral loophole. The only remaining option is surrender, and surrender is terrifying not because it means loss of self, but because it means loss of control over how that self will be reshaped. Isaiah portrays surrender not as passive resignation, but as radical trust in a God whose ways remain largely hidden. Even promises of restoration are not fully explained. The path forward is offered without a map. This uncertainty challenges modern sensibilities as much as ancient ones. We prefer clarity. Isaiah offers faith. We prefer timelines. Isaiah offers patience. We prefer guarantees. Isaiah offers covenant. The terror of Isaiah is therefore existential. It confronts the reader with the question, can you trust a God who does not explain himself on your terms? The book insists that God's silence is not absence, and his delay is not neglect. But this insistence does not remove discomfort. It intensifies it. Faith becomes something lived without constant reassurance. Isaiah's language reinforces this discomfort. His imagery oscillates between cosmic and intimate. He speaks of stars, nations, and eternity, then shifts abruptly to wounds, tears, and trembling hearts. The effect is disorienting. The reader is reminded that the same God who governs galaxies also attends to individual suffering. This dual scale is overwhelming. It means no part of life is insignificant, and no part is autonomous. Isaiah's terror lies in this totality. There is no neutral ground. The book forces a reckoning with reality as God defines it, not as humanity prefers it. In doing so, Isaiah dismantles false comfort. He refuses to let suffering be meaningless, but he also refuses to let it be easily justified. Pain is neither glorified nor dismissed. It is acknowledged, inhabited, and ultimately redeemed, but never trivialized. This balance is rare and unsettling. Isaiah does not offer optimism. He offers hope, and hope in Isaiah is costly. Hope requires waiting. It requires endurance. It requires faith that survives unanswered questions. It requires belief that restoration will come even when evidence suggests otherwise. This kind of hope is terrifying because it demands everything without immediate proof. Isaiah knows this. That is why his book does not rush resolution. Even visions of renewal are framed as future realities, not present comforts. The reader is invited to live in anticipation, not arrival. This mirrors the human condition itself. We live between promise and fulfillment, between loss and restoration, between fear and trust. Isaiah gives language to this in-between space. He sanctifies it. He refuses to let it be wasted. This is perhaps the most profound terror of all. That waiting is not meaningless. That suffering is not random. That silence is not empty. Isaiah insists that God is at work even when nothing appears to be happening. This challenges the deepest human fear, that our pain is unnoticed. Isaiah says it is not, but he does not say it will be quickly resolved. This tension lingers. By this point in the book, the reader has been stripped of illusions, comforted without being coddled, and confronted without being crushed. Isaiah has led them to the edge of faith where trust is no longer theoretical. It is necessary. The terror of Isaiah is now transformed into a question rather than a threat. Will you trust a God who is holy enough to judge, patient enough to wait, and loving enough to suffer? The book does not answer for you. It waits. After Isaiah has stripped away false securities, after he has led the reader through judgment, exile, silence, suffering, and surrender, the book begins to open towards something vast and unexpected. It does not rush there. It does not leap from terror to triumph. Instead, it widens slowly, as if the horizon itself is being pulled back. What Isaiah reveals now is not merely restoration, but recreation. This is where fear begins to change its shape. Isaiah speaks of a future that cannot be engineered by human effort or recovered by political reform. The devastation has been too complete. The exile has gone too deep. What is needed is not repair but renewal. The language shifts accordingly. The prophet no longer focuses primarily on kings or nations, but on creation itself. Mountains, deserts, animals, and the heavens are drawn into the vision. This cosmic scope is intentional. Isaiah understands that sin did not only fracture society, it fractured the relationship between humanity and the world it inhabits. Violence, injustice, and idolatry left scars not only on people but on the land. Fields were left barren, cities became ruins. Creation groaned under the weight of human rebellion. So the hope Isaiah now presents must be equally comprehensive. He speaks of deserts blooming, of wastelands rejoicing, of water breaking forth where there was only dryness. These images are not poetic exaggerations. They are theological declarations. The future God promises is not a return to what once was, but the arrival of something that has never yet existed. This is deeply unsettling in its own way. Isaiah is not offering nostalgia. He is offering transformation. The terror of earlier chapters prepared the ground for this vision. Without judgment, this hope would feel sentimental. Without exile, it would feel shallow. Without suffering, it would feel unearned. Isaiah insists that the new creation does not bypass pain. It emerges from it. The prophet describes a world where former hostilities are undone. Predators and prey coexist. Violence no longer defines relationships. Fear is no longer the organizing principle of life. These images challenge not only ancient expectations, but modern ones as well. We are accustomed to managing conflict, not eliminating it. Isaiah envisions its end. This raises a profound question. Can humanity even imagine a world not shaped by fear? Isaiah suggests that we cannot unless God redefines reality itself. The holiness that once terrified nations now becomes the source of healing. The presence that once exposed sin now sustains peace. God does not become less holy in the future Isaiah describes. He becomes more fully known. This is crucial that the hope of Isaiah is not built on God changing his nature. It is built on creation finally aligning with it. Isaiah's vision of Tantuha, the renewed creation, is not escapism. It does not remove humanity from the world. It restores the world to its intended purpose. People still live, work, build, and rejoice. But they do so without fear of loss, without anxiety of judgment, without the shadow of exile. And yet Isaiah never lets this future become immediate. The prophet is careful to keep hope oriented forward. It is promised, not possessed. This maintains the tension that defines the book's ending. Even as joy is described, warning remains. Even as peace is envisioned, responsibility is not removed. Isaiah closes with an image that is both beautiful and unsettling. On the one hand, there is worship, nations streaming to God's presence, life flourishing, death diminished. On the other hand, there is remembrance of judgment, a reminder of what rebellion costs. The book refuses to let the future erase the past. This is deliberate. Isaiah understands that true hope is not amnesia, it is redemption with memory. The scars of history are not hidden, they are transformed into testimony. The people who inhabit this renewed world do so with full awareness of what was lost and what was restored. Gratitude replaces entitlement. Humility replaces pride. This is why Isaiah's ending feels open rather than closed. The future is secure, but the present remains unresolved. The reader is left standing between what is promised and what is experienced. The terror has not disappeared, it has been reframed. Fear no longer dominates, but reverence remains. God is still holy, still sovereign, still beyond manipulation. Isaiah does not end with certainty. He ends with invitation. An invitation to live now in light of what is coming, to shape present faith by future hope, to endure waiting without despair, to resist fear without denial. This is not an easy invitation. It demands trust over control. It demands patience over immediacy. It demands faith that survives ambiguity. Isaiah's vision of new creation therefore does not cancel the book's terror. It redeems it. Fear becomes the pathway through which hope is understood. Judgment becomes the doorway to renewal. Exile becomes the precondition for return. The reader realizes that Isaiah has not been telling a story merely about ancient Judah. He has been describing the human condition. We live in a world fractured by choices we did not fully understand when we made them. We long for restoration but resist transformation. We want peace without surrender, hope without cost, glory without suffering. Isaiah denies us these shortcuts. He insists that the path to renewal runs through truth, through exposure, through waiting, and through a God who is faithful even when he is silent. This is why the book remains unsettling even at its most hopeful. The future Isaiah describes is certain, but participation in it requires change. Not superficial change, but reorientation of trust, allegiance, and desire. The terror of Isaiah gives way, not to comfort, but to clarity. God will renew creation. God will restore his people. God will dwell among them, but he will not be redefined. As Isaiah's vision stretches toward this future, the reader senses that the story is not finished. The promises remain open, awaiting fulfillment. The book does not conclude with resolution, but with expectation. This expectation is not passive, it calls for response. Isaiah leaves us not with answers, but with a horizon, a future that draws us forward even as we remain rooted in the present. Fear no longer controls the narrative, but neither is it forgotten. It has done its work, it has stripped away illusion, and now hope stands on solid ground. At the end of the book of Isaiah, nothing is left untouched, not nations, not kings, not faith, not fear, and not the reader. What began as a vision in the temple, smoke filling the air, seraphim crying out holiness, a prophet undone by the sight of God, has now unfolded into a sweeping revelation that spans centuries, empires, suffering, exile, silence, and finally, renewal. Isaiah does not merely tell a story, he confronts a reality. The question is no longer why Isaiah is terrifying. The question is why it could not have been anything else. From the beginning, Isaiah presents a God who refuses to be managed. His holiness shatters assumptions. His judgment dismantles false security. His patience stretches beyond human comfort, and his redemption arrives through suffering rather than spectacle. This is not the God humanity invents. It is the God who reveals himself. The terror of Isaiah is not rooted in destruction alone. It is rooted in exposure. Isaiah exposes the fragility of human power, the emptiness of hollow worship, and the danger of trusting anything more than God himself. Every empire Isaiah names Assyria, Babylon, the nations beyond rises and falls not because of chance, but because history itself is accountable to divine purpose. This realization unsettles because it strips away the illusion that the world is neutral. Isaiah insists that events carry meaning, choices carry weight, silence carries intention. Nothing simply happens. Judah learned this through loss. Exile was not merely geographic displacement, it was theological reckoning. It forced a people to confront who they were when stripped of land, temple, and king. Isaiah anticipated this reckoning long before it occurred, not to inspire fear, but to prepare faith for survival. And faith did survive, not because it was protected from suffering, but because it was refined by it. Isaiah's most terrifying insight may be this, that God's faithfulness does not always look like immediate rescue. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes it looks like waiting. Sometimes it looks like hope sustained in darkness. This challenges the way many approach belief. We often equate faith with comfort and divine presence, with protection from pain. Isaiah refuses this equation. He shows a God who remains present even when his people suffer the consequences of their choices. A God who speaks, then falls silent, not to abandon but to allow truth to take root. The silence in Isaiah is not absence. It is discipline. It is space for repentance. It is preparation for redemption. When the servant appears in Isaiah's vision, the terror reaches its most paradoxical form. God does not resolve humanity's rebellion by crushing it, but by absorbing it. He enters suffering rather than avoiding it. He carries guilt rather than dismissing it. This overturns every expectation built by fear. And yet, it does not erase judgment. The servant does not negate holiness. He fulfills it. The cost of restoration is revealed to be far greater than the cost of destruction. Judgment breaks nations. Redemption breaks God himself into human suffering. This is why Isaiah remains so unsettling. It reveals a God whose love is not sentimental, whose justice is not negotiable, and whose mercy is not cheap. The final vision of renewed creation does not erase the scars of history. It redeems them. Isaiah's future is not built on forgetting, but on transformation. What was broken becomes the foundation for what is restored. Fear gives way to reverence. Exile gives way to homecoming. Silence gives way to presence. But even here, Isaiah does not close the story. He leaves it open. The promises stand, but they await fulfillment. The horizon is clear, but the journey continues. The reader is not allowed to observe passively. Isaiah demands response. Will you trust this God? Will you surrender control? Will you live now in light of what is coming? These questions do not fade with time. They grow louder. Isaiah speaks to every generation that faces collapse of systems of identity, of certainty. He speaks to societies that confuse prosperity with blessing and silence with absence. He speaks to individuals who fear losing control more than losing truth. And he speaks without compromise. The terror of Isaiah is therefore a gift. It dismantles illusions before they destroy faith. It confronts fear before it hardens into despair. It exposes false hope so that true hope can endure. Isaiah's God is not safe, but he is faithful. He is not predictable, but he is good. He does not promise comfort, but he promises restoration. As the book closes, the reader stands where Isaiah first stood, confronted by holiness, aware of inadequacy, invited into purpose. The smoke has cleared. The vision remains. The final echo of Isaiah is not a threat. It is an invitation spoken with solemn clarity. Return, trust, wait, hope. The terror has done its work. What remains is a choice, and the story, though written, is still unfolding.